Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters most. When 65-year-old rancher Levi Cargill watched lightning strike his family's four-generation ranch and turn a lifetime of memories to ash, he thought he'd lost it all. The ranch was gone. His wife had passed a year before. His only son hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. But buried beneath the charred staircase, hidden in a fireproof box he never knew existed, were letters. His late wife had written letters meant for their estranged son, letters filled with family secrets and a mother's desperate plea for forgiveness and reunion. What truths had his wife kept hidden, and could they finally bring his broken family back together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Levi Cargill's world changed forever started like any other morning in the Montana high country. He woke at 5:30, same as he had for 47 years, his body remembering rhythms his mind no longer had to track. The bedroom was dim and cool, the August dawn just beginning to bruise the eastern sky beyond the window. He dressed slowly, pulling on worn jeans and a chambray shirt that had faded from years of sun and washings, his movements deliberate and measured in the way of a man whose joints reminded him daily of decades spent working the land. The bed beside him was empty. It had been empty for 13 months now, though some mornings he still reached across the sheets before remembering. Sarah was gone. Cancer had taken her piece by piece over 18 months, until the woman he'd loved, since they were both 18 years old, had weighed less than 100 pounds, and her voice had become a whisper he had to lean close to hear. He touched the gold band on his left hand, turning it absently as he moved through the silent house. The ring had been there, so long it had worn a groove into his finger, a permanent mark of the promise he'd made in 1978, when he and Sarah had stood in the small church in town and pledged their lives to each other. He'd never taken it off, not once in 47 years, not even after she died. The house felt too big without her. It always had, really, even when their son Ethan was still living here, filling the rooms with noise and life. The Cargill ranch house was a sprawling two-story structure built in 1892 by Levi's great-grandfather, Josiah Cargill, when he'd claimed this land under the Homestead Act and decided Montana was where his family would sink roots. 4 generations had been raised within these walls. 4 generations of Cargills had learned to ride horses in the corral out back, had eaten dinner at the long oak table in the kitchen, had carved their initials into the barn beams when they thought their fathers weren't looking. Now, Levi was the only one left. He made coffee in the old percolator, the same one his mother had used when he was a boy. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and familiar, mixing with the scent of aged wood and the faint mustiness that crept into old houses, no matter how well you maintained them. Through the window above the sink, he could see the eastern pasture stretching away toward the tree line. The grass turned golden in the summer heat. 200 head of cattle were out there somewhere, scattered across 1,200 acres of rangeland that had belonged to his family longer than Montana had been a state. He poured his coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Best Dad," a Father's Day gift from Ethan when the boy was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Levi studied the mug for a moment, running his thumb over the faded lettering. Ethan would be 32 now. Living in Seattle last, Levi had heard, though that information was 2 years old and had come third-hand through Sarah's sister. Ethan didn't call, didn't write, didn't visit. The breach between them had opened 11 years ago. During an argument, Levi could still replay word for word if he let himself. Ethan had wanted to go to college, wanted to study environmental science or some such thing, wanted to leave the ranch. Levi had said no, had told his son that 4 generations of Cargills had worked this land and he wasn't about to be the one to let the legacy die. Had said some other things too, things he'd regretted almost as soon as they left his mouth but had been too proud to take back. "You're just like your grandfather," Sarah had told him after Ethan stormed out that night, her voice quiet and sad. Too stubborn to see when you're wrong, too proud to admit it even when you do. She'd been right, of course. She usually was. But by the time Levi had worked up the courage to try making things right, Ethan was gone. Moved to Seattle, changed his phone number, made it clear through Sarah that he didn't want contact with his father. Sarah had maintained a relationship with their son, taking trips to visit him a few times a year, talking to him on the phone every week. But she'd stopped trying to broker peace between them after a while, had simply loved them both separately and carried the weight of their stubbornness on her shoulders. "You need to fix this," she'd told Levi during one of their last real conversations, before the cancer had spread to her brain and stolen her ability to form words. "When I'm gone, you'll be alone, and you'll wish you'd swallowed your pride when you had the chance." He'd promised her he would, had told her he'd reach out to Ethan, make things right. But then she'd slipped into that final decline, those last terrible weeks when she couldn't speak or recognize him. And after she died, he'd felt so hollowed out and exhausted that the thought of picking up a phone and hearing his son's voice felt like more than he could handle. So he'd let it go. Let the months slip by. Let 13 months become his new normal, a life of solitude punctuated only by the occasional visit from neighbors or the feed store delivery driver. Levi carried his coffee onto the front porch and lowered himself into the wooden rocking chair that had been his father's. The sun was climbing now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was going to be hot today. The whole summer had been brutal, temperatures climbing into the 90s most afternoons, the grass crackling and dry, despite his best efforts to irrigate the pastures nearest the house. The Forest Service had issued fire warnings every week for the past month. Everyone in the county was on edge, watching the mountains, sniffing the air for smoke. He sipped his coffee and watched the light change, thinking about all the mornings he'd sat here with Sarah beside him, both of them quiet and comfortable in that way married people can be. When they've known each other long enough, that silence becomes its own language. She'd always had her tea, never could stand coffee, and she'd hold the cup with both hands like she was cold even in summer. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask sometimes, when she caught him staring out at the land with that faraway look. "Just counting my blessings," he'd tell her, and he'd mean it. The sound of a vehicle on the gravel drive pulled him from his memories. Levi looked up to see Tom Hendrick's pickup truck rolling toward the house, dust trailing behind it. Tom was his nearest neighbor, lived 5 miles east, on a spread about half the size of Levi's. They'd gone to high school together, had ranched side by side for 40-some years, had helped each other through droughts and hard winters and the slow decline of the ranching economy. Tom was one of maybe 3 people Levi saw with any regularity these days. The truck pulled to a stop near the porch and Tom climbed out, moving with the careful stiffness of a man whose back had given him trouble for the better part of a decade. He was 68, 3 years older than Levi, his face weathered and lined from a lifetime outdoors. He wore his usual uniform of work jeans, dusty boots, and a pearl-snap shirt. "Figured I'd find you out here," Tom said, climbing the porch steps. "You get your herd moved to the north pasture?" "Most of them," Levi replied. "Still got about 20 stragglers I need to round up this afternoon." "Coffee?" "Don't mind if I do." Levi fetched another mug from the kitchen and poured his friend a cup. They sat together in the rocking chairs, watching the sun continue its climb, not speaking for a while because they didn't need to. This was the kind of friendship built on shared experience rather than conversation, understanding rather than words. "Radio says we might get thunderstorms this afternoon," Tom finally said. "Dry lightning, probably. No rain with it." Levi nodded slowly. "Been worried about that. Everything's so dry this year. One good strike and the whole mountainside could go up." "Forest Service has crews staged all over the county," Tom said. "They'll jump on anything that starts." "Maybe." Levi took a long drink of his coffee. "But there's a lot of country out there. Can't watch it all." They fell silent again, both men thinking about fire, about the reality of living in wildfire country, about the way one bad day could erase everything a man spent his life building. It was the unspoken fear that lived in every rancher's mind during the summer months, the thing you tried not to think about too much because thinking about it wouldn't change anything. "You hear from Ethan lately?" Tom asked after a while, his voice gentle. Levi shook his head. "Not since the funeral. He came, paid his respects, and left the next day. We barely said 2 words to each other. That's a shame." Tom studied his coffee mug. "Sarah would have wanted you boys to work things out." "I know what Sarah wanted." Levi's voice came out rougher than he intended. "But wanting something and getting it are 2 different things." Tom nodded, knowing better than to push. They finished their coffee in silence, and then Tom stood to leave, saying he had fence repairs to tend to. Levi walked him to his truck. "You take care of yourself, Levi," Tom said as he opened the driver's door. "You need anything, you call." "I will." But they both knew he wouldn't. Levi Cargill hadn't asked for help in 40 years and wasn't about to start now. After Tom left, Levi spent the morning doing what he always did: checking fence lines, moving irrigation pipes, doctoring a cow with a cut on her foreleg. The work was endless and repetitive and exactly what he needed. As long as he was working, he didn't have to think about the empty house waiting for him, or the son who wouldn't return his calls, or the fact that he was 65 years old, and every day he felt a little more certain that he'd die alone in this place, the last Cargill, the end of a line that had started with Josiah's dream and would finish with Levi's stubbornness. By noon, the temperature had climbed into the low 90s, and the air had taken on that thick, heavy quality that comes before a storm. Levi looked up at the sky, seeing clouds beginning to build on the western horizon, dark and towering. The wind had picked up too, gusting across the pastures, making the dry grass hiss and wave. He should probably move more cattle to the north pasture, away from the tree line, should probably fill the water troughs, make sure everything that could blow away was tied down. But he was tired suddenly, bone-tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the morning's work. He went inside instead, made himself a sandwich he didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table pushing it around his plate while the wind rattled the window frames. His wedding ring caught the light from the window, the gold gleaming dully. He touched it again, that old habit, and found himself thinking about the first time he'd put it on Sarah's finger, how young they'd both been, how certain that love and hard work were all you needed to build a good life. They'd been right about that. Mostly. The ranch had prospered. They'd raised a son. They'd built something together. But somewhere along the way, Levi had forgotten that building something meant more than just keeping the land in the family. It meant keeping the family itself together. And that was something he'd failed at completely. The afternoon wore on. The clouds built higher. Levi dozed in his chair at the kitchen table, his sandwich half-eaten, his mind drifting through memories that felt more real than the present moment. When he finally woke, it was to the sound of thunder rumbling across the mountains, and the first thing he smelled was smoke. The thunder woke him fully, a deep rolling boom that seemed to shake the floorboards beneath his feet. Levi pushed himself up from the kitchen table and moved to the window, his heart already beginning to hammer in his chest. The sky to the west was black, roiling with clouds that seemed to be moving too fast, pushed by winds he could hear howling through the eaves. Lightning flickered inside the cloud bank, bright and silent from this distance. Then he saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from the ridgeline about 2 miles west, right where the heaviest timber grew. Even as he watched, the smoke thickened, darkened, began to spread. "No," he said aloud, his voice flat and certain. "No, not today." He grabbed the phone and dialed the fire service, but the line was already busy. They'd be getting calls from all over the county. He tried again, got a busy signal, slammed the receiver down. Through the window he could see the smoke growing, could see flames beginning to show orange against the dark backdrop of the trees. The wind was pushing the fire straight toward his ranch. He had maybe an hour, maybe less. Levi moved through the house like a man in a nightmare, grabbing things without thinking, working on instinct and panic. Photo albums from the living room bookshelf, Sarah's jewelry box from the bedroom dresser, important papers from the office safe. He threw everything into the bed of his truck, his hands shaking, his breath coming fast. The wind was howling now, gusting hard enough to rattle the shutters, carrying the smell of smoke that grew stronger with each passing minute. The family Bible. He needed to get the family Bible. It was upstairs in the spare bedroom, the one that had been Ethan's room, sitting on the dresser where it had sat for as long as Levi could remember. Inside the front cover were handwritten records going back to 1892, listing every Cargill birth and death and marriage, the entire family tree, inscribed in fading ink by hands long dead. It was the one thing, the single thing, that connected him to his great-grandfather and all the generations between. He took the stairs 2 at a time, moving faster than he had in years, feeling his knees protest, but ignoring them. The Bible was right where it should be, heavy and leather-bound, its pages thin as tissue paper. He tucked it under his arm and started back down, but halfway down the staircase he stopped and looked back. Ethan's room. He hadn't been in there in years, had kept the door closed after the boy left, unable to face all those reminders of the son he'd driven away. But now, with fire coming and time running out, he found himself moving back up the stairs, pushing open the door, standing in the doorway looking at a room frozen in time. Posters still hung on the walls. A baseball glove sat on the dresser. The bed was made with the same plaid comforter Ethan had used as a teenager. Sarah had kept it all exactly as it was, a shrine to the boy who'd left and never come back. After she died, Levi hadn't had the heart to change anything. He stepped inside, his chest tight. On the desk sat a photograph in a wooden frame, a picture of the three, of them from maybe 15 years ago, back before everything fell apart. They were standing in front of the barn, all of them smiling, Ethan with his arm around Sarah, Levi with his hand on his son's shoulder. They looked happy. They looked like a family. Levi grabbed the photograph and ran. By the time he got back outside, the sky had turned an ugly orange-grey, and ash was beginning to fall like snow. He could hear the fire now, a distant roar that sounded almost like wind but wasn't, punctuated by the crack and crash of trees going down. The cattle in the near pasture were running, bunched together and panicked, making for the creek bottom where they must have sensed safety. He threw the photograph in the truck bed and climbed behind the wheel, his hands slick with sweat. The engine turned over on the first try. He pulled away from the house, glancing back one time through the rear-view mirror, seeing the structure that had sheltered 4 generations of his family, standing solid, against the approaching wall of fire. It wouldn't stand for long. The fire service had set up a command post 3 miles down the valley, on the other side of the creek, where the land opened up into irrigated hayfields that would serve as a firebreak. Levi pulled in among dozens of other vehicles, ranchers and homeowners, who'd evacuated ahead of the flames, all of them standing in small clusters, watching the mountains burn. Tom Hendricks found him almost immediately, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red-rimmed. "Levi, thank God. I tried calling but couldn't get through. How bad is it?" Tom shook his head slowly. "Bad. Wind's pushing it right down the valley. They've got crews working to protect structures, but there's just too much fire, too much wind. We lost our hay barn about 20 minutes ago." They stood together and watched, along with everyone else, as the fire consumed the mountains. Helicopters roared overhead, carrying buckets of water that looked pitifully small against the scale of the inferno. Fire trucks raced back and forth along the road, their lights flashing, their radios crackling with urgent voices. The sun disappeared behind the smoke, turning everything a strange twilight grey, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Levi thought about the house, about the barn, about the corrals and the equipment sheds and the 1,000 small things that made up a working ranch, about his father's rocking chair on the porch, about the kitchen where he'd eaten breakfast every morning for 65 years, about Ethan's room with its frozen-in-time shrine to a childhood that felt like someone else's memory now. About Sarah's grave, up on the hill behind the house where she'd asked to be buried so she could look out over the land she'd loved. The fire burned all afternoon and into the night. Levi sat in his truck, unable to watch, but unable to look away, his body numb, his mind refusing to process what was happening. Around midnight, one of the fire service commanders came by to tell him that they'd lost the structure, that the main house had gone up around 10 p.m., that there'd been nothing they could do to save it. Levi nodded, said thank you. The words felt strange in his mouth, thanking someone for telling him his life had just burned to the ground. He dozed in fits through the night, waking every hour to the sound of engines or voices, or simply to the smell of smoke that had saturated everything. When dawn finally came, grey and hazy, he climbed out of the truck and walked toward the command post, where they were organizing crews to escort property owners back to check on their land. "It's not safe yet," the commander told him, a young woman with exhausted eyes. "But we can take you up there. Let you see what's left." What's left? Such a small phrase for such complete devastation. The drive back took 20 minutes, following fire trucks and water tenders through a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon. Everything was black. The trees were charred spikes. The grass was gone, burned down to bare earth. Smoke still rose in columns from hot spots, and the air shimmered with heat. When they reached what had been his property, Levi climbed out of the truck slowly, his legs unsteady. The house was gone. Not damaged, not partially destroyed, gone. Where the structure had stood was nothing but a pile of collapsed beams and ash, still smoking, still too hot to approach closely. The barn was gone too, the corrals, the equipment sheds, everything. He walked forward anyway, drawn by some need he couldn't name, stopping at the edge of what had been the front porch. Through the smoke and ash he could make out the stone foundation, the chimney still standing like a grave marker. And there, about where the staircase would have been, something metallic caught the grey morning light. Levi moved closer, the heat making him squint, ash crunching under his boots. It was a box, maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, made of metal that had been scorched black but hadn't melted. A fireproof box. He'd never seen it before, had no idea it existed. With hands that had gone suddenly cold despite the heat, Levi reached down and pulled the box free from the debris. The box was still warm to the touch, but not hot enough to burn. Levi carried it away from the ruins, past the skeletal remains of the barn, down to where his truck was parked on the access road. His hands were shaking. He didn't know why. It was just a box. Just some unknown thing that had been hidden beneath his staircase for who knew how long. But part of him knew, even before he opened it, that whatever was inside was going to matter. He set the box on the tailgate of his truck and studied it for a long moment. The metal was scarred and blackened, but intact. There was no lock, just a simple latch mechanism that had been welded shut by the heat. Levi pulled his knife from his pocket and worked at the latch, prying and twisting until it finally gave with a sharp crack. The lid opened with a groan of hot metal. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more, stacked in neat bundles tied with string. The paper was yellowed but intact, protected by the fireproof seal. On top of the stack sat a single envelope, unsealed, with a name written across the front in handwriting Levi would have recognized anywhere. Ethan. His breath caught. The letters were Sarah's. These were Sarah's, hidden in a box he'd never known existed, all of them addressed to their son. With fingers that felt thick and clumsy, Levi pulled out the top envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was quality stationery, the kind Sarah used to order from the catalogue, with small flowers printed along the margins. The date at the top was from 2 years ago, about 6 months before she'd been diagnosed. "My dearest Ethan," the letter began, and Levi's eyes blurred immediately. He blinked hard, forcing himself to focus, to read. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and somehow these letters have found their way to you. I hope that's true. I hope you're holding this in your hands and knowing that even at the end, you were in my thoughts and in my heart. I've been writing to you for months now, letters I never sent because I didn't know how. Your father doesn't know about them. I keep them hidden in a box under the staircase, a place I know he'll never look because he hasn't been upstairs to your old room since you left. That's one of the many small ways his stubbornness manifests, refusing to face the reminders of what he's lost. But I'm writing anyway, because I need to say things I couldn't say on the phone during our Sunday calls. Things I need you to know, even if I lose my nerve and these letters stay hidden forever. The first thing is this: your father loves you. I know you doubt that. I know the last words between you were bitter and harsh, words neither of you really meant but both of you were too proud to take back. But I've lived with Levi Cargill for 47 years, and I know his heart better than he knows it himself. He loves you more than anything in this world, more than the ranch, more than his pride, more than his stubborn need to be right. He's just forgotten how to show it. The second thing is this: I'm afraid I'm dying. I haven't been to the doctor yet, but I know something's wrong. I've lost weight I can't afford to lose. I'm tired all the time, a bone-deep exhaustion that doesn't lift no matter how much I rest. And there's pain, sharp and insistent, in places there shouldn't be pain. I'll go to the doctor soon. I'll find out what's wrong, and I'll face it with whatever courage I can gather. But before I do, I needed to write this first letter, to start saying the things I might not get the chance to say later. Ethan, you need to forgive your father. Not for his sake, though he needs it desperately, for yours. Holding onto anger for 11 years will poison you from the inside out. I've watched it poison him, turning him into someone harder and smaller than the man I married, and I don't want that for you. Come home. While there's still time, while I'm still here to help you both find your way back to each other, please. All my love. Mom. Levi's hands were shaking so badly he had to set the letter down on the tailgate. His vision swam. His chest felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed his heart with a fist. She'd known. 6 months before the diagnosis, Sarah had already known something was wrong. And instead of telling him, instead of going to the doctor right away, she'd written letters to their estranged son, letters she'd hidden in a fireproof box beneath the staircase, like some kind of insurance policy against the future. Why hadn't she told him? But he knew why. Because he would have pushed her to go to the doctor immediately. Because he would have taken control of the situation the way he took control of everything, making decisions and giving orders, and generally being the stubborn, overbearing man he'd always been. Sarah had wanted time to think, to process, to write these letters without his interference, so she'd kept it secret. Levi picked up the next letter in the stack, his hands steadier now, driven by a need to understand. The date on this one was 2 weeks after the first. He read it quickly, his eyes moving across Sarah's familiar handwriting. This letter talked about the doctor visit, about the preliminary tests, about the words possible malignancy that had sent ice through her veins. It talked about her fear, about lying awake at night listening to Levi snore beside her, wondering how to tell him, wondering if she even should tell him until she knew for certain what she was facing. The third letter came a week later. The biopsy had confirmed cancer, ovarian, advanced, already spread to her lymph nodes. The prognosis was guarded. She'd cried in the doctor's office, she wrote, and then she'd come home and made dinner like it was any other Tuesday, because she still hadn't found the courage to tell Levi the truth. Levi set that letter down and picked up the fourth, and then the fifth, and then he lost count because he was reading through tears now, reading about his wife's slow march toward death from her own perspective, hearing her voice in every word, feeling her presence so strongly it was like she was standing right beside him. The letters weren't all about cancer and dying. Some of them were about memories, stories from Ethan's childhood that Sarah wanted preserved. The time he'd fallen off his horse and broken his arm, but refused to cry. The way he used to catch fireflies in jars on summer evenings. His first day of school, so small and nervous, clutching his lunchbox like a lifeline. The Christmas when he was 10 and had saved his allowance for 3 months to buy Levi a new pocket knife because the old one had a broken blade. She wrote about the ranch, about the sunrise from the bedroom window, about the way the grass smelled after rain. She wrote about Levi, about the man he'd been when they were young, before stubbornness had calcified into his defining trait. She wrote about regrets, about things she wished she'd said or done differently, about the hope that somehow, some way, her son and her husband would find each other again before it was too late. Near the bottom of the stack was a letter dated 3 weeks before she died, when the cancer had spread to her brain and she was losing the ability to form coherent thoughts. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible in places, but the message was clear. "Ethan, I'm running out of time. I need you to know that everything I've written here is true. Your father is a difficult man, but he's a good man. He's hurting more than he'll ever admit. When I'm gone, he's going to be alone unless you reach out. Please don't let pride, his or yours, keep you apart. Family is all that matters in the end. The ranch will fall apart without you two to care for it together. But more than the ranch, your father will fall apart. He needs you. He just doesn't know how to say it." Levi sat on the tailgate of his truck, surrounded by ash and smoke and the ruins of his life, and wept. The sun climbed higher, burning through the smoke, turning the ruined landscape into a surreal study in black and grey. Levi sat with the letters spread around him, reading and rereading them, trying to absorb the weight of everything Sarah had been carrying alone. He'd thought he'd known her completely, every thought in her head, every fear in her heart. But these letters revealed a whole interior life he'd never suspected, private thoughts and observations she'd kept hidden even as she lay dying in their bed. It was the second-to-last letter that broke him completely. This one wasn't addressed to Ethan. His own name was written across the envelope, in Sarah's shaky, late-stage handwriting. Levi pulled it out slowly, almost afraid of what he'd find inside. The date was 4 weeks before she died, during those final terrible days when she'd still had moments of clarity between the long stretches of confusion. "My darling Levi," it began. "My darling Levi, by the time you read this, I'll be gone and you'll have found the box. I'm sorry for keeping secrets, for hiding these letters where I knew you'd never look. But I needed to do this my way, without your well-meaning interference, without you trying to fix things the way you always try to fix things. I know you, Levi Cargill. I've known you since we were teenagers sharing a milkshake at Parker's Diner, and I know that your first instinct, when faced with a problem, is to take control, to make decisions, to bull your way through until things bend to your will. It's one of the things I've always loved about you, that strength and certainty, but it's also the thing that cost us our son. You asked me once, near the end, if I blamed you for Ethan leaving. I told you no, that it was complicated, that you'd both said things you didn't mean. But the truth is more nuanced than that. Yes, you were stubborn and harsh. Yes, you put the ranch ahead of our son's dreams. But Ethan was stubborn too proud to admit he was wrong or to make the first move toward reconciliation. You're more alike than either of you ever wanted to admit. What I'm trying to say is this. I don't blame you for Ethan leaving, but I do blame you for him staying gone. You had 11 years to pick up the phone, 11 years to write a letter, 11 years to drive to Seattle and knock on his door. But you didn't, because your pride wouldn't let you admit you were wrong. Now I'm asking you to set your pride aside. Take these letters to Ethan, all of them. Let him read what I wrote. Let him see how much I loved him, how much I wanted him to come home. And when you give him these letters, you tell with him the truth. Tell him you were wrong. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you need him. Because you do need him, Levi, more than you realize. The ranch is gone by now, I expect. I've been watching the weather reports and seeing the fire danger warnings, and I have a feeling in my bones that it won't last. Maybe that's the morphine talking, or maybe it's the cancer in my brain making me see things that aren't there. But I think the ranch is going to burn, and when it does, you'll have nothing left but your stubborn pride and your loneliness. Don't let that be enough. Don't let pride be the thing that defines the rest of your life. Go to Seattle, find our son, give him these letters, apologize, beg if you have to. Do whatever it takes to bring him back into your life, because a man without family is just a man standing alone in an empty room, waiting for the end. I've loved you for 47 years, Levi. I'll love you for however long comes after that, but I can't watch over you anymore. I can't be the bridge between you and Ethan, the one who keeps the peace and translates your stubborn silences into words he can understand. You have to do that yourself now. Be brave. Be humble. Be the man I fell in love with, the one who knew how to admit when he was wrong and wasn't afraid to show his heart. I believe in you. I always have. Forever yours. Sarah. Levi folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, his hands moving with a precision that felt almost mechanical. His face was wet with tears. He hadn't realized he was crying. The smoke from the still-burning ruins made his eyes sting, gave him an excuse for the tears if anyone happened to see him. But there was no one to see. He was alone, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, holding a box full of letters from his dead wife, surrounded by the ashes of everything he'd spent his life building. Sarah was right. Of course she was right. She'd always been right about things like this, about people and relationships and the invisible threads that held families together. He'd been too stubborn to fix things with Ethan when she was alive, too proud to admit his mistakes, too certain that time would somehow heal wounds that only grew deeper with each passing year. Now she was asking him to do what he should have done 11 years ago, to go to Seattle, to face his son, to say the words that had stuck in his throat for more than a decade. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I need you. The question was whether he had the courage to do it. A vehicle approached on the access road, pulling Levi from his thoughts. It was Tom's truck, moving slowly through the ash and debris. Tom parked behind Levi's truck and climbed out, his expression somber. Fire service says it's safe to be here now, long as you don't get too close to the hot spots, Tom said. He looked at the letters spread across the tailgate, at Levi's red-rimmed eyes, and had the good sense not to comment. Found anything worth saving? Levi gestured at the box. Letters. From Sarah. She wrote them to Ethan. Kept them hidden. I never knew they existed. Tom absorbed this slowly, the way he absorbed most information, thinking before speaking. What do they say? That I'm a stubborn fool. That I need to fix things with my son before it's too late. That she knew the ranch was going to burn and wanted to make sure I'd have family left when it did. Smart woman, you're Sarah. Smarter than me, that's for certain. Levi ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit of ash and sweat and tears. She wants me to take these to Seattle, give them to Ethan. Apologize for being such a hard-headed old man. So what's stopping you? Levi laughed, a sound without humor. Pride, mostly. Fear that he'll tell me to go to hell, and I'll have to live with knowing I tried and failed. Fear that it's too late, that 11 years is too long to leave a wound untended. Maybe, Tom said, but the only way to know is to try. They stood in silence for a while, two old men contemplating the ruins of one life and the possibility of rebuilding another. The smoke had thinned enough that Levi could see the far mountains now, still green where the fire hadn't reached, still holding promise. I don't even know where he lives, Levi finally said. Sarah visited him a few times, but she never told me the address, said it was Ethan's business if he wanted me to know. We can find him, Tom said. Internet makes that sort of thing easy these days. My grandson can probably track him down in 10 minutes. What if he doesn't want to see me? Then you'll deal with that when it happens, but you won't know unless you go. Levi gathered up the letters, stacking them carefully back in the fireproof box. His wedding ring caught the light again, that old, familiar weight on his finger. He thought about Sarah, about all the years they'd had together, about the promises he'd made standing in that small church in 1978, for better or worse. In sickness and in health, she'd kept her promises. Time, he kept his. "All right," he said. "Help me find my son." Tom's grandson was a 23-year-old named Marcus who worked remotely for some tech company and seemed to live most of his life staring at a computer screen. He found Ethan Cargill in less than 5 minutes, pulling up a LinkedIn profile, a Facebook page, and what looked like a professional website for an environmental consulting firm. "This him?" Marcus asked, turning his laptop so Levi could see the screen. Levi's breath caught. It was Ethan, but not the Ethan he remembered. The boy who'd left home at 21 had been lean and long-haired, all youthful energy and righteous anger. This man on the screen was 32, his hair cut short and professional, his face filled out in the way men's faces do when they leave their 20s behind. He wore a suit in the profile picture, was smiling at the camera with an expression that looked practiced and polished. He looked successful, he looked happy, he looked like someone who'd built a life for himself, someone who'd moved on. "That's him," Levi said quietly. Marcus clicked through a few more screens, pulling up information with the casual ease of someone who'd grown up in the digital age. "Looks like he works for Pacific Environmental Consulting in Seattle. Lives in a neighborhood called Fremont. I can get you a street address if you want, but that'll take a little more digging." "Please," Levi said. 20 minutes later, he had everything. An address, a phone number that Marcus said was probably accurate based on public records. Even a map showing how to get there from Montana, though the thought of driving 12 hours to Seattle made Levi's chest tighten with anxiety he wasn't ready to acknowledge. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of staying in Tom's guest room, of dealing with insurance adjusters who kept using words like total loss and complete devastation while looking at him with practiced sympathy. 3 days of going through the motions of life while feeling like he was moving underwater, everything slow and muffled and strange. The letters stayed with him constantly, tucked in the fireproof box that had become the single most valuable thing he owned. He read them every night before bed, Sarah's words becoming so familiar he could recite passages from memory. But familiarity didn't make them easier to bear. Every letter was a reminder of his failure, of the 11 years he'd wasted in stubborn silence while Sarah carried the weight of their family's fracture alone. On the 4th morning after the fire, Levi woke before dawn and knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He'd spent 3 days telling himself he needed to get his affairs in order first, needed to handle the insurance paperwork, needed to make sure his cattle were accounted for and his property was secure. But those were excuses, transparent even to himself. The truth was, he was afraid. Afraid Ethan would refuse to see him, afraid that Sarah's letters wouldn't be enough to bridge 11 years of silence. Afraid that he'd make the 12-hour drive only to stand on his son's doorstep like a beggar, hat in hand, and hear that he'd waited too long. But Sarah's voice was in his head, clear as if she were standing beside him. "Be brave, be humble, do whatever it takes." He packed his truck with the few possessions he'd managed to save: the photo albums, Sarah's jewelry box, the family Bible, a single change of clothes Tom had lent him. The fireproof box went in the cab beside him, close enough to touch. He filled the truck with gas, checked the oil and tire pressure, and stood in Tom's driveway for a long moment, gathering courage. Tom came out to see him off, moving slowly in the early morning chill. "You call me when you get there," he said. "And Levi, don't go in expecting him to make it easy on you. Boy's got 11 years of hurt to work through." "I know, but don't give up either. You're his father. That counts for something, even when things are complicated." Levi nodded, not trusting his voice. He climbed into the truck and pulled away, watching Tom's figure shrink in the rearview mirror until the road curved and he disappeared from view. The drive to Seattle took him through the heart of Montana, across the Idaho Panhandle, and into eastern Washington. The landscape changed gradually, mountains giving way to rolling hills, open rangeland to thick forests. Levi drove with the radio off, alone with his thoughts, going over what he'd say to Ethan 1,000 different ways in his mind. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I need you in my life." The words felt inadequate no matter how he arranged them. How did you apologize for 11 years? How did you compress more than a decade of regret and loneliness into sentences that wouldn't sound empty or rehearsed? He stopped for lunch at a diner in Coeur d'Alene, but couldn't eat. His stomach was tied in knots, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee cup. An older waitress noticed and refilled his cup without being asked, her expression kind. "Long drive?" she asked. "Going to see my son," Levi said. "Haven't seen him in 11 years. She nodded slowly, like she understood everything that sentence implied. "Well, honey, whatever happened between you, he's your son. That's what matters in the end." Levi wanted to believe her, wanted to think that biology and history were enough to overcome pride and stubbornness and all the harsh words that couldn't be taken back. But he'd lived long enough to know that family could break just as easily as any other relationship, maybe easier because the stakes were higher and the wounds cut deeper. He got back on the road, driving west into a sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and red, colors that reminded him uncomfortably of fire. By the time he crossed into Washington, darkness had fallen and his headlights carved a tunnel through the black. He thought about pulling over, finding a motel, getting some rest before tackling Seattle. But he was afraid if he stopped, he'd lose his nerve. So he drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee, pushing his 65-year-old body to keep going when everything in him wanted to turn around and drive back to the familiar ruins of his life. At least those ruins made sense. At least he knew what he was dealing with there. Seattle emerged from the darkness around 4 in the morning, a sprawl of lights spreading across the landscape like stars fallen to earth. Levi followed the GPS on Marcus's borrowed phone, navigating through empty streets, his heart hammering harder with each turn. The Fremont neighborhood was quiet at this hour, tree-lined streets and older houses with small yards and cars parked along the curbs. The GPS announced he'd arrived at his destination. Levi pulled to the curb and cut. The engine, staring at the house number illuminated by his headlights. This was it. This was where Ethan lived, where he'd built a life without his father, where he'd become the man in that LinkedIn photo. Levi sat in his truck as the sky slowly lightened, watching windows that stayed dark, waiting for some sign of life within. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles white. The fireproof box sat beside him, Sarah's letters waiting inside, the words she'd written in secret now, the only bridge he had left to his son. He thought about all the things he should have said 11 years ago. Thought about Sarah dying while he stood beside her bed, promising to fix things when she was gone. Thought about the ranch burning, 4 generations of history reduced to ash because he'd been too stubborn to see what really mattered. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the house in shades of gold. A light came on in an upstairs window. Someone was awake. It was now or never. Levi waited another hour, watching the house come to life through his windshield. More lights came on. A figure moved past a downstairs window, too quick to identify. A cat appeared on the front porch, stretching in the morning sun before disappearing around the side of the house. Normal morning sounds began to fill the neighborhood, cars starting, dogs barking, someone's garbage truck rumbling past. At 7:30, the front door opened and Ethan Cargill stepped out onto the porch. Levi's heart stopped. There was his son, real and solid, no longer just a face on a computer screen, but an actual person standing 20 yards away. He wore running clothes, athletic shorts and a fitted shirt, and was pulling wireless earbuds from his pocket. He looked healthy, fit, completely put together in a way that made Levi suddenly conscious of his own rumpled clothes, his 3-day stubble, the way he probably smelled after driving through the night. Ethan was stretching on the porch when he noticed the truck. His movements slowed, then stopped. Even from this distance, Levi could see the moment recognition hit, could see his son's body go rigid, his expression shifting from casual morning routine to something harder and more guarded. Levi opened the truck door and climbed out. His legs were stiff from the long drive, his back aching. He felt every one of his 65 years as he walked toward the house, the fireproof box tucked under his arm. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was uncertain, like he didn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Hello, Ethan." Levi stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly unsure how to proceed. Did he climb the steps? Did he stay where he was? After 11 years of silence, what were the rules for this kind of reunion? "What are you doing here?" Ethan's tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. Just careful, reserved. The voice of someone who'd been hurt before and wasn't about to make that mistake again. "I needed to see you, to talk to you. I've got something." Levi held up the box. "Letters. From your mother. She wrote them to you, kept them hidden. I found them after the fire." "What fire?" "Lightning strike. Couple weeks ago. Burned the whole ranch to the ground. Everything's gone, except what's in this box." Ethan absorbed this information with no visible reaction, his face a careful mask. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't understand what you're doing on my porch at 7:30 in the morning. Your mother wanted you to have these letters. She wrote them during her last year, before the cancer took her. I didn't know they existed until I found the box in the ruins." Levi's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "She wanted me to bring them to you, to tell you that I was wrong, about everything." Ethan stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "No, I don't want this. I don't want you showing up after 11 years with some box of letters and expecting everything to be okay. I'm not expecting anything to be okay. I'm just trying to keep a promise I made to your mother. You should have kept promises to her while she was alive, like the promise to fix things with me before she died. But you didn't do that, did you?" The words hit like physical blows. Levi felt his face flush, felt his old defensive instincts rising up, the urge to snap back, to justify himself, to turn this into another argument he could walk away from. But Sarah's voice was in his head again. "Be humble. Be brave." "You're right," he said quietly. I should have done a lot of things differently. I was stubborn and proud, and I let my ego destroy our relationship. Your mother told me that, over and over, but I wouldn't listen. And now she's gone, and the ranch is gone, and I've got nothing left except this box, and the knowledge that I was a terrible father who drove away the only son he'll ever have." Ethan's expression flickered, some emotion passing across his face too quickly to identify. "Don't do this. Don't show up here trying to make me feel guilty. I'm not trying to make you feel anything. I'm just stating facts." Levi took a breath, steadying himself. "Look, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But your mother spent her last year writing these letters to you, and she asked me to deliver them. So I drove 12 hours from Montana to keep that promise. Just take them, read them. Then you can tell me to leave and never come back, and I'll respect that." The front door opened behind Ethan. A woman stepped out, dark-haired and pretty, wearing pajamas and a robe. She looked from Ethan to Levi, clearly sensing the tension. "Everything okay out here?" she asked. "It's fine, Amy." Ethan's voice softened when he spoke to her. "This is my father. He was just leaving." Amy's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, I didn't know you were expecting company." "I wasn't." Levi looked at the woman, at the easy intimacy between her and his son, the way she'd come out to check on him without hesitation. This was Ethan's life now. A house in Seattle. A woman who clearly cared about him. A career in environmental consulting, whatever that meant. He'd built all of this without Levi, without the ranch, without any connection to the life he'd left behind. Maybe Sarah had been wrong. Maybe it was too late. "I'll go," Levi said. He set the fireproof box down on the bottom step. "But the letters stay. Read them or burn them, that's your choice." But they're yours. Your mother wanted you to have them. He turned to leave, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. This had been a mistake. Coming here, thinking that a box of letters could bridge 11 years of hurt and anger and silence. Thinking he could just show up and everything would be... Wait. Levi stopped, turned back. Ethan was staring at the box, his jaw working like he was chewing. Over words he wasn't sure he should say. How many letters are there? Ethan asked. Dozens, maybe 50 or 60. She wrote them over the course of a year, from when she first suspected the cancer until a few weeks before she died. And you didn't know? She never told you? Never said a word. Kept them hidden in a fireproof box under the staircase, where she knew I'd never look. Levi managed a bitter smile. She knew me pretty well. Ethan looked at Amy, some silent communication passing between them. Then he looked back at Levi. I need time to think about this. To process. You can't just show up after 11 years and expect me to drop everything. I understand. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks that way. Ethan pointed south. Café Luna. I'll meet you there in 2 hours. We can talk then. But I'm not making any promises. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was more than Levi had any right to hope for. 2 hours, he agreed. I'll be there. He walked back to his truck, his legs unsteady, and pulled away from the curb before he could see whether Ethan picked up the box or left it sitting on the steps. In his cup holder, forgotten until now, was the old "World's Best Dad" mug he'd brought from home, a reminder of simpler times when that title had seemed like truth rather than mockery. 2 hours. He had 2 hours to figure out what to say, how to compress 11 years of regret into words that wouldn't sound empty. 2 hours to prepare for a conversation that would either rebuild the bridge to his son or burn it down forever. He found a gas station and parked, sat with his head resting against the steering wheel, and tried not to think about all the ways this could still go wrong. Café Luna was a small neighborhood place with mismatched furniture and the kind of worn charm that comes from years of regular customers and strong coffee. Levi arrived 20 minutes early and claimed a table in the back corner, far from the windows and the morning rush of people grabbing drinks on their way to work. He ordered black coffee he didn't drink, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 9:30. Ethan arrived exactly on time, carrying the fireproof box under one arm. His expression was carefully neutral, but Levi could see red around his eyes, the telltale signs of someone who'd been crying. He'd read the letters then, at least some of them. I ordered you coffee, Levi said, gesturing to the cup waiting across from him. Black, the way you used to drink it. Don't know if that's changed. It hasn't. Ethan sat down slowly, setting the box on the table between them, like a barrier, or maybe a bridge. I read about half of them. Couldn't finish. It was too much. I understand. Do you? Ethan's voice was sharp. Do you understand what it's like to read your dead mother's words? To hear her voice in every sentence, to feel like she's right there in the room with you, except she's not, because she's been gone for over a year and you missed her funeral by 2 days because you couldn't get a flight out of Singapore fast enough? The words hit like a punch to the gut. You were in Singapore? Work trip. I manage international environmental projects. I was on the other side of the world when Amy called to tell me Mum had died. By the time I got back to the States, you'd already buried her. I didn't know. I thought you just didn't come because... Levi stopped, the implications settling over him. I thought you stayed away because you didn't care. Of course I cared. She was my mother. Ethan's hands were shaking slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. I loved her more than anyone in the world. And she's gone, and I'll never get to tell her all the things I should have told her when she was alive. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 men, united by grief if nothing else. The cafe hummed with morning activity around them, but Levi felt like they were in a bubble, separate from the normal world. There's something I need to tell you, Ethan said finally. Something I found in the letters that you might not have seen yet. What do you mean? Ethan reached into the box and pulled out an envelope that looked different from the others. Older, more worn, the address written in different handwriting. This was tucked in the very bottom, under all of Mum's letters. It's addressed to her. From me. From 8 years ago. Levi took the envelope slowly, studying the return address. Seattle. 8 years ago would have been 3 years after Ethan left home. He pulled out the letter inside and read, "Dear Mum, I know we agreed I wouldn't write to Dad, but I need you to reconsider. I've been gone 3 years now, and I think about home every day. I think about the ranch, about the work I left undone, about Dad working himself to death trying to do everything alone. I think about the things we said to each other, and I regret all of it. I know Dad doesn't want to hear from me. I know he probably thinks I abandoned the family, that I chose my own selfish dreams over the ranch and everything the Cargill name means. But Mom, I want to come home. I want to fix this. I'm willing to work the ranch, to give up my job here, to prove that I'm committed to the family legacy. Please tell him I'm ready to talk. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I want to come home." Levi stopped reading, his vision blurring. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rustled. "I never saw this. Sarah never told me you wanted to come back." "Keep reading," Ethan said quietly. Levi forced his eyes back to the page. "But if he's not ready, if he's still angry and unwilling to forgive me for leaving, then I need you to tell me that too. I can't keep living in this limbo, hoping for something that might never happen. I need to know if there's a path forward, or if I should accept that the bridge between us is burned forever. I love you, Mum. I miss you every day, but I need to know the truth. Ethan." Below Ethan's signature was another note, this one in Sarah's handwriting, dated a week after Ethan's letter. "My dearest Ethan, I received your letter and my heart breaks for you, for your father, for all of us. You ask if there's a path forward, and the truth is complicated. Your father is not ready. He's still hurt, still angry, still too proud to admit he was wrong. I've tried talking to him, tried suggesting he reach out to you, but he shuts down every time I bring up your name. He's convinced himself that you abandoned the family and that any attempt to reconnect now would be a sign of weakness. But here's what I know. If you came back now, with him still trapped in this mindset, it would end in another fight. More harsh words, more hurt on both sides, and this time it might be permanent. So I'm asking you to wait, stay in Seattle, build your career, live your life, give your father time to realize what he's lost, to soften enough that reconciliation is possible. I know it's not fair to ask you to be patient when you've already been patient for 3 years. But I can't watch you two destroy what's left of your relationship because neither of you is ready to truly forgive. I promise you this. I will work on him. I will chip away at his stubbornness and his pride. And when the time is right, when I think he's ready to truly hear you, I will tell him you want to come home. But not yet. Not while the wounds are still this raw. Trust me, my son. I know what I'm doing. I love you both too much to let you ruin each other. Mom." Levi set the letter down, his hands numb. The cafe seemed to spin slightly around him, the comfortable buzz of conversation becoming a roar in his ears. He looked at Ethan, seeing his son through new eyes, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "She kept us apart," he said, his voice hollow. "All this time, I thought you didn't want to come home. But you did. You reached out. And she told, 'Want you to stay away.' She thought she was protecting us," Ethan said. "Protecting you from your own pride, protecting me from more hurt. She was trying to wait until you were ready. But I never got ready. I never softened. I just got more bitter and more stubborn as the years went by." Levi felt something breaking inside him, some fundamental understanding of his marriage, his wife, his entire life, shifting into a new configuration. "She spent 8 years running interference, keeping us apart, waiting for a moment that never came. She didn't know she was running out of time," Ethan said. "The letters make that clear. Even after the diagnosis, she thought she'd have longer. Thought she could orchestrate our reconciliation before the cancer took her. But it moved faster than anyone expected. Levi thought about all the times Sarah had brought up Ethan's name, all the gentle suggestions that maybe he should reach out, maybe enough time had passed. He'd shut her down every time, too proud to admit she was right, too stubborn to make the first move. And all the while, she'd been holding Ethan's letter, knowing their son wanted to come home, carrying that knowledge alone. Why didn't she just tell me? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why didn't she show me the letter? Because she knew you. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. She knew that if you thought I was coming back because she told me to, you'd see it as manipulation rather than genuine reconciliation. She wanted you to reach out to me on your own, to make the choice to swallow your pride and admit you were wrong. She was giving you the chance to be the bigger man, and I never took it. No, you never did. The truth of it settled over Levi like a weight. Sarah had spent years trying to protect them both, trying to engineer a reconciliation that would heal rather than cause more damage. She'd kept Ethan's letter secret, had written her own letters, planning for a reunion she'd never lived to see, had died still, hoping that somehow her husband and son would find their way back to each other. And Levi had spent those same years nursing his wounded pride, convinced Ethan didn't care, never knowing his son had tried to come home and been turned away by the one person who loved them both. "I'm sorry," Levi said, the words inadequate but necessary. "I'm sorry I was too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. I'm sorry your mother died carrying this burden alone. I'm sorry you spent 8 years thinking I didn't want you home, when the truth was, I didn't know you'd asked." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup. "The thing is, Dad, even knowing all this, even understanding what Mum was trying to do, I'm still angry with you. Because she wouldn't have had to keep us apart if you'd been willing to admit you were wrong in the first place. This whole mess, all of it, traces back to that night 11 years ago when you told me I was selfish for wanting to go to college. You're right, it does." Levi met his son's eyes across the table. "And I was wrong. I was wrong to put the ranch ahead of your dreams. I was wrong to try to force you into a life you didn't want. I was wrong to let my pride keep me from fixing things when there was still time. Your mother saw all of that clearly. I'm only seeing it now, when it's almost too late." "Almost? The ranch is gone. Your mother is gone. But you're still here. We're both still here, and maybe that means it's not completely too late." Ethan stared at him for a long moment, emotions flickering across his face too fast to read. Then he picked up his coffee and took a long drink, his eyes distant. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said finally. "Not right away. Maybe not ever. But I'm willing to try, for Mum's sake if nothing else." It wasn't much, but it was more than Levi had any right to hope for. They talked for 3 hours in that coffee shop, long enough that the morning rush gave way to the lunch crowd and then to the afternoon lull. Levi told Ethan about the fire, about watching the mountains burn from 3 miles away, about returning to find nothing but ash and that single fireproof box buried in the rubble. Ethan talked about his life in Seattle, about the environmental consulting work that took him all over the world, about Amy and the house they'd bought together 6 months ago. "She's good for me," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that reminded Levi of the way he'd talked about Sarah in the early days. "Keeps me grounded. Calls me out when I'm being stubborn or proud, which apparently runs in the family." Levi managed a small smile at that. "Your mother used to do the same for me. I didn't always listen, but she kept trying. Do you understand now why she did what she did?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Keeping us apart, I mean." "Holding on to my letter," Levi turned, his wedding ring on his finger, that old unconscious gesture, thinking about the question. Did he understand? Part of him wanted to be angry with Sarah for the deception, for keeping secrets, for thinking she knew better than he did what their family needed. But another part of him, the the part that had loved her for 47 years, understood completely. She was trying to save us from ourselves, he said finally, trying to give us both time to become the kind of men who could have a real reconciliation instead of just another argument. She knew me well enough to know I needed to hit rock bottom before I'd be willing to change. And the ranch burning down was rock bottom. That and losing her. Though, I think the ranch was what finally broke through my thick skull. I spent 40 years building that place up, making it successful, telling myself I was doing it for the family, when really I was doing it for myself, for my pride. And then it all burned in a few hours, and I realized none of it mattered if I didn't have family to share it with. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing this. Mum's letters talked about that, about how you put the ranch ahead of everything else, even ahead of her sometimes. She never said it with bitterness, just observation, like she understood that's who you were and she'd made peace with it. She shouldn't have had to make peace with it. She should have had a husband who put her first. Levi's voice was rough. I failed her in a lot of ways, Ethan. The ranch might have burned down, but our marriage was already ashes in some ways long before that. She loved you anyway. The letters make that clear too. She loved you despite your flaws, maybe even because of some of them. She just wished you could love yourself enough to admit when you were wrong. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Levi thought about all the times Sarah had tried to tell him he was being too rigid, too uncompromising, too focused on his own way of doing things. He'd dismissed her concerns, told himself she didn't understand the pressures of running a ranch, the weight of carrying on a family legacy, but she'd understood perfectly. She'd just known him too well to think direct confrontation would change anything. I want to visit the ranch, Ethan said suddenly. What's left of it, anyway? I want to see where Mom's buried, pay my respects. I should have done that a year ago, but I couldn't face it. Couldn't face you. Tom Hendricks is looking after the place. What place there is to look after, anyway? Cattle are mostly accounted for. Land still there, just scorched. Levi paused. Your mother's grave is on the hill behind where the house used to stand. Fire didn't reach that far. We could go together, if you want. When? Whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. Ethan pulled out his phone, checking his calendar. I've got a project wrapping up this week, but I could take a few days after that, fly out to Montana, rent a car. Maybe Amy could come too. She never met Mom, but she's heard so many stories, she feels like she knows her. I'd like to meet her properly, Levi said. Seems like she's important to you. She is. Ethan hesitated, then added, We're getting married. In the spring. We were going to do something small, just friends, but maybe, I don't know, maybe you could come, if you wanted. The invitation was tentative, hedged with uncertainty, but it was an invitation nonetheless. Levi felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. I'd be honored, he said simply. They left the coffee shop together as the afternoon shadows lengthened, walking back toward Ethan's house through quiet neighborhood streets. The conversation flowed easier now, less weighted with history and hurt. Ethan pointed out landmarks, the park where he played pickup basketball on weekends, the grocery store where Amy worked, part-time while finishing her graduate degree, the Thai restaurant they ordered from too often because neither of them was much of a cook. This was Ethan's life now. Not the ranch, not Montana, but this neighborhood in Seattle with its coffee shops and restaurants and the kind of urban density that would have made Levi claustrophobic after a few days. But Ethan seemed comfortable here, settled in a way that suggested he'd found where he belonged. Do you ever miss it? Levi asked as they turned onto Ethan's street. The ranch, I mean. The work, the land. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. I miss the quiet, the space, being able to see for miles in every direction. Seattle's great, but it's crowded, noisy, hard to find room to breathe. But you wouldn't come back. No, my life is here now. My work is here. Amy's here. Ethan glanced at his father. But that doesn't mean I don't care about the land, about the family history. I just couldn't be the person you wanted me to be. I know that now. Took me long enough to figure it out, but I know. Levi stopped walking, turning to face his son on the sidewalk. I want you to know something, Ethan. I'm proud of you. Proud of the life you've built, the work you're doing. Your mother would be proud too. I should have told you that years ago, but I was too caught up in my own disappointment to see what was right in front of me. Ethan's eyes went bright with unshed tears. That's all I ever wanted to hear, just that you were proud of me, that I hadn't disappointed you by leaving. You never disappointed me. I disappointed myself by driving you away. Levi reached out, hesitated, then put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. It was the first time they'd touched in 11 years. I can't change the past, can't take back the things I said or undo the hurt I caused, but I can promise to do better going forward. If you'll let me. I want to, Ethan said, but I need time, need to work through 11 years of anger and hurt. This isn't going to be fixed in a day or even a week. I know. I'm not expecting miracles, just a chance to try. They reached Ethan's house to find Amy on the porch, reading a book and sipping iced tea. She stood as they approached, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. How did it go? She asked Ethan. Better than I expected, he said, taking her hand. Amy, this is my father, Levi. Dad, this is Amy Chen, my fiancée. It's nice to meet you properly, Levi said, offering his hand. I apologize for the early morning ambush. Wasn't my finest moment. Amy shook his hand firmly. Ethan told me about the letters, about what happened to your ranch. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. From what Ethan's told me, you've been good for him. That means a lot to me. They stood awkwardly on the porch for a moment, three people trying to navigate the complicated dynamics of reconnection. Finally, Amy broke the silence. Have you eaten? I was just about to start dinner. You're welcome to stay if you'd like. Levi glanced at Ethan, looking for any sign that the invitation wasn't genuine. But his son just nodded, a small smile on his face. I'd like that, Levi said. Dinner was simple pasta and salad, nothing fancy, but it felt momentous nonetheless. Levi sat at Ethan's table, in Ethan's house, eating food Amy had cooked, while they talked about inconsequential things. Amy's graduate work in urban planning, Ethan's upcoming project in Portland, the weather in Seattle versus Montana, normal conversation, the kind families have over dinner tables all over the world. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There were still long silences, still careful avoidance of certain topics, still the weight of 11 years sitting between them like an unwelcome guest. But it was a start. More than a start, it was a foundation, something they could build on if they were both willing to do the work. After dinner, Levi excused himself to find a hotel. Ethan insisted on looking up options on his phone, finding a place just a few miles away that had availability. They stood on the porch again as the summer evening cooled, neither quite ready to say goodbye, but not sure how to extend the moment. Come by for breakfast tomorrow, Ethan said finally, before you head back to Montana. We can talk more about visiting the ranch, about the wedding, about whatever else needs talking about. I'll be here, Levi promised. He drove to the hotel in a daze, his mind struggling to process everything that had happened since that morning. The confrontation on the porch, the letters at the coffee shop, the revelation about Sarah's role in keeping them apart, the dinner with Ethan and Amy, the first family meal he'd shared with his son in over a decade. In the hotel room, Levi sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his wedding ring, holding it up to the light. Sarah had worn a matching band, had been buried with it on her finger. He'd never taken his off, not once in 47 years, even after she died. It was a promise, a commitment, a physical reminder of vows he'd made when he was 18 years old. But now, he understood those vows differently. For better or worse had included Sarah keeping secrets, making choices she thought were best, even when they kept him in the dark. in sickness and in health, had included her slow death from cancer while trying to orchestrate a reconciliation she'd never lived to see. Till death do us part had come too soon, before she could finish the work she'd started, before she could see if her careful planning would bear fruit. She'd loved him enough to protect him from his own worst instincts, loved Ethan enough to ask him to wait, to be patient, to give his father time to grow into the man who could accept him back. And she'd loved them both enough to leave letters behind, insurance against her own mortality, a final attempt to bring her broken family back together. Levi slipped the ring back on his finger and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd have breakfast with his son. Next week, they'd visit Sarah's grave together. In the spring, he'd watch Ethan get married. Small steps, tentative bridges being built over the chasm that had separated them for 11 years. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough to make up for all the lost time, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you could hope for. The flight to Montana felt surreal. Levi sat beside Ethan on the plane, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and tried to remember the last time they'd traveled anywhere together. Ethan would have been maybe 15, a family trip to Billings for a livestock show. The boy had been bored out of his mind, spending the whole weekend with headphones in, counting down the hours until they could go home. Now he was 32, looking out the window at the landscape scrolling past below, and Levi could see his face change as the city sprawl gave way to open country. Could see the moment Ethan recognized the particular quality of Montana light, the way the land stretched endless and empty toward distant mountains. "It's strange," Ethan said quietly. "I spent 11 years trying not to think about this place, but looking at it now, it feels like coming home." "Land gets in your blood," Levi replied, "whether you want it to or not." They'd left Amy back in Seattle. This trip needed to be just the two of them, father and son, facing what remained of their family legacy together. Tom met them at the small regional airport, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Ethan. "Boy, you're a sight for sore eyes," Tom said, pulling Ethan into a hug. "Your mama would be so happy to see you boys together." The drive to the ranch took 40 minutes, following roads Levi had driven thousands of times, but which now felt strange and unfamiliar with Ethan sitting in the back seat. They passed other ranches, still operating, life going on despite the fire that had torn through the valley. The mountains were still scarred, black stripes cutting through the green where the flames had burned, but new growth was already beginning to show in places, the land recovering the way it always did. When they crested the final rise and the property came into view, Ethan drew in a sharp breath. From this distance you could see the full extent of the devastation. The house was gone, just a blackened foundation and the chimney standing alone. The barn was gone, the outbuildings, everything reduced to ash and charred timber. "Jesus," Ethan whispered, "there's nothing left." "No," Levi agreed, "nothing left but the land itself." Tom parked near what used to be the access road. They climbed out into bright afternoon sunshine, the smell of old smoke still lingering in the air despite weeks of wind and weather. Levi led the way through the ruins, pointing out where things used to be. The kitchen, the living room, the staircase where the fireproof box had been hidden. Ethan walked slowly through it all, his face pale, his hands in his pockets. He stopped at what would have been his old bedroom, staring down at scorched floorboards and twisted metal that might have once been his bed frame. "All those posters I left on the walls," he said. "The baseball glove on the dresser. Mom kept everything exactly the way I left it. I always thought that was sentimental of her, but now I wonder if it was something else, like she was keeping a place for me to come back to." "She was," Levi said. "She never gave up hope that you'd come home." They walked in silence toward the hill, behind where the house had stood. The fire hadn't reached this far, had burned itself out before cresting the rise. The grass here was still green, still alive, swaying gently in the breeze. At the top of the hill, a simple granite headstone marked Sarah's grave. Sarah Marie Cargill, 1960 to 2024. Beloved wife and mother. Ethan stopped at the base of the hill, his breathing uneven. Levi could see him struggling, could see the weight of a year's worth of grief threatening to overwhelm him. Without thinking, he reached out and took his son's hand. Ethan's fingers closed around his, holding tight. They climbed the hill together. At the grave, Ethan dropped to his knees, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Levi knelt beside him, his own vision blurred, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. They cried together, father and son, mourning the woman who'd loved them both, who'd kept them in her heart, even when they couldn't keep each other. "I'm sorry, Mom," Ethan choked out. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I missed so much time with you because I was too stubborn to come home." Levi put his arm around Ethan's shoulders, pulling him close the way he used to when Ethan was small and scraped his knee or had a bad dream. His son leaned into him, no longer the angry 21-year-old who'd stormed out of the house, but a grown man who'd lost his mother and was trying to figure out how to keep living in a world that no longer held her. "She knew you loved her," Levi said, his voice rough with tears. "She knew, and she loved you more than anything in this world. That's what the letters were about, making sure you knew that, even after she was gone." They stayed there for a long time, kneeling at Sarah's grave, while the sun moved across the sky and shadows lengthened across the scorched valley below. Eventually, Ethan reached out and picked up a small stone from the grave, smooth and round, worn by wind and weather. He held it in his palm, closing his fist around it. "For remembering," he said simply. Levi nodded, understanding. "Some things you needed to carry with you. Some memories required physical weight." They walked back down the hill as the sun began to set, painting the scorched landscape in shades of gold and amber. Tom had left them alone, driving back to his place, to give them space, promising to return in the morning. Levi and Ethan stood at the edge of what used to be the front yard, looking out across 1,200 acres of land that had belonged to the Cargill family for 4 generations. "What are you going to do with it?" Ethan asked. "The land, I mean. You can't rebuild. The insurance money won't stretch that far. And even if it did, you can't run a ranch at 65 by yourself." Levi had been thinking about this question for weeks, ever since the fire. The practical answer was to sell, take whatever money he could get, and move into town, maybe rent an apartment near Tom, spend his remaining years doing odd jobs and trying not to think about all he'd lost. It made sense. It was the reasonable choice for a man his age, with no family to pass the legacy to. Except that wasn't true anymore. He had family, standing right beside him. "I was thinking," Levi said slowly, "that maybe I don't have to decide alone. This land belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. You're a Cargill. Your great-great-grandfather homesteaded this property. That gives you a say in what happens to it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I can't move back here, Dad. My life is in Seattle. My work is there. Amy's there. We're building something together. I know that. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm just saying maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's a way to honor the family legacy without any of us having to sacrifice who we are. What did you have in mind?" Levi pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, something he'd been working on during the long hours at Tom's house. "Conservation easement. We deed the land to a trust, make sure it stays wild, stays open, no development, no subdividing, just 1,200 acres of Montana rangeland, preserved forever. The cattle operation ends with me, but the land continues. Your environmental work, my ranching legacy, seems like they could meet in the middle there." Ethan took the paper, reading through Levi's handwritten notes by the fading light. His expression was hard to read, some complicated mix of emotions playing across his face. "You'd be okay with that?" he finally asked. ending 4 generations of ranching? The ranching ended the night the fire came through. What I'm talking about now is something different. Something that honors the past while looking toward the future. Levi paused. Your mother would have liked it. She always said the land was more important than what we did with it. Said the mountains and the grass and the wildlife were here long before the Cargills and would be here long after. Maybe it's time we acknowledge that truth. Ethan folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his pocket. I'd like to be part of that, part of deciding what happens to this place. I want my name on those documents, want to know that even if I'm not living here, I'm still connected to it. You'd always be connected to it. This land is in your blood, whether you want it there or not. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun touched the western mountains, both of them thinking about legacy and loss and the complicated ways families endure. Finally, Ethan spoke again. I want to do something before we leave tomorrow. Something to mark this moment. What did you have in mind? Help me set a fence post. Just one. Right where the house used to be. Something to show that even though the buildings are gone, the Cargill family is still here, still claiming this ground. Levi felt something warm spread through his chest, something that might have been pride or gratitude or simple love for his son. Tom's got supplies in his barn. We can do it first thing in the morning, before your flight. Good. Ethan turned to face his father directly. I want you to know something, Dad. I forgive you. For the argument 11 years ago. For all the years of silence. For being too stubborn to reach out. I forgive you because Mom asked me to, but also because holding on to anger for this long is exhausting. I'm tired of carrying it. Levi's throat constricted. I don't deserve that. Maybe not. But I'm giving it anyway. Not for your sake, for mine. Because I want to move forward, not keep living in the past. Ethan's voice was steady but gentle. And I need you to forgive yourself too. Need you to stop carrying guilt around like a stone in your pocket. Mom wouldn't want that. She'd want you to live whatever years you have left with lightness, not weight. I'll try. That's all I'm asking. Just try. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving them in twilight. In the distance, an owl called, beginning its nightly hunt. The land was healing already, life reasserting itself in the spaces fire had cleared. Levi thought about Sarah, about the letters she'd left behind, about the careful way she'd tried to guide them to this moment even after death. She'd known what they needed, had known that sometimes you had to lose everything before you could understand what really mattered. The ranch was gone, but the family remained. Damaged, changed, but still here. Still standing on ground their ancestors had claimed more than a century ago. That was legacy enough. They set the fence post at dawn, while the valley was still caught between darkness and light, that liminal moment when the world holds its breath before beginning again. Tom had brought over a post-hole digger and a fresh cedar post the night before, along with concrete mix and tools. He helped them mark the spot right where the front porch stairs used to be, where Levi had climbed up and down thousands of times over 65 years. The work was hard, the ground resistant after weeks without rain. But it felt right to struggle, to earn this small monument through sweat and effort. Ethan worked the digger while Levi steadied the post, and for a while they didn't talk, just moved in, that synchronized way people do when they're working toward a common goal. When the hole was deep enough, they mixed the concrete and poured it carefully, making sure the post was level and straight. As the concrete began to set, Ethan pulled out a pocket knife, the same knife Levi had given him for his 16th birthday, carried all these years, and carved something into the fresh cedar. Cargill, 2025. Not a date of ending, but a date of continuing. A marker that said the family was still here, still holding this ground, even if the form of that holding had changed. Your great-great-grandfather, Josiah, would have liked this, Levi said, stepping back to look at their work. He wasn't much for fancy things. Just believed in marking your place in the world and doing the work in front of you. Tell me about him, Ethan said. I know the basics: homesteaded the land, built the original house, but I don't know the stories. So Levi told him about Josiah arriving from Ohio in 1891, with everything he owned in a single wagon, claiming this land before Montana was even a state. Told him about the first winter, brutal and long, when Josiah had nearly given up and gone back east, but decided to stay because the sunrise over these mountains made him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. Told him about building the house board by board, raising cattle, finding a wife who was tough enough to love this hard country as much as he did. It was the story of their family, the one that had been passed down through 4 generations, and Levi realized as he told it that Ethan had never heard most of it. Because when Ethan was young, Levi had been too busy working the ranch to sit down and tell family stories, and after Ethan left, there'd been no one to tell them to. But he was telling them now. Better late than never. They finished the post as the sun cleared the mountains, flooding the valley with light. The concrete had set enough that a post stood firm, a vertical line against the horizontal sprawl of scorched earth. It would weather and grey over time, but it would stand. Would still be there long after both of them were gone, a marker that the Cargills had been here, had meant something, had left their mark on this piece of Montana. Tom drove them to the airport mid-morning. The 3 of them crowded into the cab of his truck. At the terminal, Tom pulled Ethan aside for a moment, said something Levi couldn't hear, then hugged him hard. "Take care of your old man," Tom said, loud enough for Levi to catch. "He's going to need family around, even if he won't admit it." "I will," Ethan promised. Then it was just Levi and Ethan, standing outside the terminal with 40 minutes until boarding. The conversation felt incomplete somehow, like there were still things that needed saying, but neither of them knew quite what they were. "Thank you," Levi finally said, "for coming out here, for giving me a chance, for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." "You're my father," Ethan replied simply. "And Mum loved you enough to spend her last year writing letters, trying to bring us back together. Least I could do was read them." "You'll call when you get back to Seattle?" "I'll call, and you'll come out for the wedding in the spring. No arguments." Wouldn't miss it. They embraced then, a real hug that lasted longer than the quick, obligatory contact from Sarah's funeral. When they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes, but neither looked away. "I love you, son," Levi said. 3 words he should have said 11 years ago. 3 words he should have been saying all along. "I love you too, Dad." Levi watched Ethan disappear through security, watched until he couldn't see him anymore, then walked slowly back to where Tom was waiting in the truck. They drove back to the ranch, to Tom's ranch now, since Levi was staying with him until he figured out what came next, in comfortable silence. That night, Levi sat on Tom's porch with a cup of coffee and Sarah's letters spread out around him, reading them one more time in the fading light. He'd read them so many times he could recite passages from memory, but they still had the power to move him, to make him feel Sarah's presence so strongly it was like she was sitting beside him. She'd known the ranch would burn, known he'd find the letters, known that losing everything material would finally open his eyes to what really mattered. She'd orchestrated all of it from beyond the grave, her love for her family so strong that even death couldn't diminish it. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters most. That's what the letters taught him. That's what the fire revealed. The ranch was gone, reduced to ash and a single fence post marking where a house once stood. His wife was gone, sleeping on a hill overlooking land she'd loved almost as much as she'd loved her family. But Ethan remained. Amy remained. And in the spring, there'd be a wedding, and after that maybe grandchildren someday, another generation of Cargills, to carry the name forward, even if they'd never ranched this land the way their ancestors had. The land itself remained too, would be preserved through the conservation trust Ethan was already helping him establish. It wouldn't be worked anymore, wouldn't produce cattle or income. But it would stay wild and open, a piece of Montana held in trust for everyone, a legacy that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with stewardship. Levi folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the fireproof box. Tomorrow he'd start making calls, setting up meetings with lawyers and trust administrators, beginning the work of converting loss into something meaningful. It would take time, would probably take years to get everything arranged the way it needed to be. But he had time now, had purpose, had a son who called twice a week, and a wedding to look forward to, and a future that looked different from anything he'd imagined, but somehow felt right anyway. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors as fire, but gentler now, a promise rather than a threat. Somewhere in Seattle, Ethan was probably sitting down to dinner with Amy, telling her about the fence post, about his father, about the beginning of something new rising from the ashes of what had burned away. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates the living from the dead, Sarah was watching both her men, finally at peace, finally moving toward each other instead of away. Her work was done. The letters had served their purpose. The family she'd fought so hard to hold together was healing at last. Levi touched his wedding ring one more time, that old familiar gesture, and smiled into the gathering darkness. He'd lost everything, ranch, wife, years he could never reclaim. But he'd found his son again, had found forgiveness, both given and received, had found a way forward that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Sometimes that's all a man can ask for. Sometimes that's more than enough.